For a long time, Russia was seen as a global powerhouse, with its vast natural resources, cultural depth, and strong presence on the world stage. But today, the story is changing for many Russians. In 2024, as political repression deepens and economic prospects shrink, more and more people are looking for a way out. According to recent data, over 600,000 Russians emigrated this year alone, a stark rise compared to previous years as war, sanctions, and internal instability make life harder. The impact of sanctions, collapsing healthcare, and soaring living costs are pushing ordinary families to their breaking point. Many can no longer afford basic needs, while censorship and a lack of freedoms have left them feeling suffocated. From young professionals seeking better opportunities abroad to families leaving for safety, the human toll of these crises is growing.
Russia is feeling the shock of Western sanctions.
They will hit the Russian economy hard.
Waging economic war on Russia on a scale that would have been unimaginable just a year ago.
What was once a place of pride for many is now a country they feel forced to leave behind. Let's take a closer look at the factors that have contributed to this growing crisis and the impact it has on the nation.
The Russian army is not able to protect even Putin's residence against Ukrainian drones.
Well, I think it shows a acknowledgement by the Kremlin that Ukraine has continued to improve its capabilities to strike targets deep inside Russia.
Russia's real estate market is currently facing significant challenges in 2024, driven by both economic and geopolitical factors. The combination of international sanctions, a struggling economy, and high inflation has created a storm of uncertainty that is affecting property values, especially in major cities like Moscow and St. Petersburg. One of the most dramatic trends is a sharp decline in demand, particularly for luxury properties. In Moscow, the demand for high-end homes has plummeted by nearly 46% since the start of the war in Ukraine, leaving the market at its weakest point in 5 years. While demand for these homes has collapsed, prices continue to rise due to higher construction costs, with the average price per square meter increasing by 14% to 1.53 million rubles. The middle and lower segments of the market are also struggling, with overall home sales declining sharply, becoming harder to obtain as banks have tightened lending amidst growing uncertainty. Additionally, developers face delays and increased costs due to a lack of materials and inflation, further pushing up home prices. The economic instability has led to a wait-and-see attitude among many potential buyers who are either postponing or canceling their real estate transactions. Simultaneously, some investors are moving their assets out of Russia, opting to buy properties abroad in safer markets like in USA, UK, and Canada. Overall, the Russian real estate market is under severe stress, with an unpredictable future driven by external pressures and domestic financial struggles.
We continue cracking down on Russian sanctions evasion, and as soon as next week, we will unveil strong new sanctions targeting those facilitating the Kremlin's war machine.
Since Russia's invasion of Ukraine, sanctions imposed by the US, EU, and other countries have severely disrupted the Russian economy, particularly in critical sectors like finance, energy, and technology. Trade-related restrictions have been among the most significant blows. Historically, Russia was a crucial provider of natural resources, particularly oil, gas, and metals, to Western countries. Prior to the sanctions, Europe alone relied on Russia for about 40% of its natural gas supply, which gave Russia substantial leverage in the global market. However, following the sanctions, it has lost much of its access to these crucial export markets. The EU has steadily cut down its dependency on Russian energy, implementing measures such as embargoes on oil imports and capping the price of Russian oil. Similarly, the US and the UK have banned Russian oil imports altogether. The restrictions on energy exports, which account for about 50% of Russia's government revenue, have contributed to the deepening of the economic crisis. By 2024, Russia is projected to lose more than $300 billion in lost energy revenue, an irreplaceable blow as alternative markets like China and India do not fully compensate for the Western market's loss. On top of this, Russia's access to global financial systems like SWIFT has been cut off, making international trade and investment more difficult. A significant portion of Russia's foreign reserves, around $300 billion, remains frozen, further destabilizing the ruble. In January 2024, the ruble fell to record lows, losing over 40% of its value since the beginning of the war. This devaluation has caused inflation to surge, with the rate expected to reach as high as 20%, dramatically increasing the price of everyday goods. The rising cost of imported goods, from electronics to pharmaceuticals, has had a devastating impact on the standard of living. Western companies that once supplied essential products have pulled out of the market, leaving many Russians with limited access to these goods or forcing them to pay exorbitant prices for alternatives. In particular, technology imports, including consumer electronics and high-tech components, have plummeted, affecting industries from automotive to medical equipment. Basic necessities like food, fuel, and medicine have become more expensive as the ruble's value declines and supply chains are disrupted. This inflation has led to widespread hardship, especially among ordinary citizens, pushing millions of Russians into poverty. Food prices alone have increased by 25%, while shortages of imported medicines, previously sourced from Western companies, have become critical, particularly for life-saving treatments. Compared to its pre-war position as a pivotal natural resource supplier to the West, Russia's economy in 2024 is in decline, isolated from global markets, and struggling under the weight of sanctions. Russia's economic stability has been severely impacted, leading to a massive exodus of its citizens. The country's GDP growth has slowed down significantly, with a projected 3.2% growth in 2024, down from 3.6% in 2023. This decline is a stark reminder of the economic turmoil that has been brewing for years. The ongoing conflict in Ukraine and Western sanctions have exacerbated the economic downturn, resulting in a decline in living conditions that has prompted many Russians to seek refuge elsewhere. The Russian economy has been plagued by a significant devaluation of the ruble, making imports more expensive and contributing to rising inflation. Inflation rates have surged, rising from 5.9% in 2023 to 6.9% in 2024. The consequences of Russia's economic downturn in 2024 have been profound, affecting nearly every aspect of daily life. For example, the average consumption of meat has decreased from 75 kg in 2015 to just 52 kg per year in 2024, highlighting a sharp decline in consumer purchasing power. While unemployment officially remains low at 2.6%, this figure masks the growing underemployment and lack of stable, profitable jobs. What's more alarming is the demographic of those leaving the country. A staggering 70% of immigrants are under 40, and over 50% hold higher education degrees, signaling a significant loss of young, skilled workers. This brain drain is not only weakening Russia's workforce but also crippling its future economic prospects, as many of the country's most capable minds are fleeing for better opportunities abroad. The economic instability has driven widespread uncertainty among Russians about their future, further deepening the loss of confidence in the country's prospects for recovery. Russia's economy faces significant challenges, which has long hindered its growth and discouraged foreign investment. Transparency International's Corruption Perceptions Index consistently ranks Russia poorly, highlighting how deeply corruption is embedded in the country's political and economic systems. This has created an unfavorable business environment, deterring investors who are concerned about legal uncertainties, bribery, and opaque regulatory practices. Additionally, according to the World Bank, poverty levels have risen, with Russia ranking 141st globally. The combination of these factors has led to a decline in economic activity and a significant exodus of Russians seeking better opportunities abroad. The healthcare system in Russia is buckling under the strain of these economic hardships. Sanctions have significantly reduced the availability of imported medical technologies and pharmaceuticals. Russia was heavily reliant on imports for high-tech medical equipment and drugs, and the disruption has left hospitals and clinics struggling to meet patient needs. The reduced access to life-saving medicines and treatments has severely affected vulnerable populations, particularly the elderly and those with chronic conditions. Moreover, the healthcare infrastructure, already underfunded, has not been able to cope with the increasing demand due to a rising number of illnesses linked to poverty, such as malnutrition and mental health issues. The quality of care has deteriorated, leading to widespread dissatisfaction and protests from both patients and healthcare workers. Foreign investment has also taken a steep dive, with hundreds of multinational companies either exiting the Russian market or scaling back operations. Since the war began, foreign direct investment inflows to Russia have plunged into deep negative territory. Key sectors like oil and gas, traditionally attractive to foreign investors, have been hit hardest. Major international firms such as BP and Shell have divested their stakes in Russian energy companies. This withdrawal of foreign investment has significantly slowed economic growth. In the absence of external funding, Russia has turned to domestic resources, but these are insufficient to compensate for the loss. This situation has contributed to a rise in unemployment and a deepening recession, making poverty more widespread. The economic struggles have ignited public anger across the country. Widespread poverty, deteriorating healthcare services, and job losses have led to protests in major cities, including Moscow and St. Petersburg.
Moscow doctors held a protest on Sunday against planned healthcare reforms, which they claim will lead to hospital closures and job losses, holding posters saying "Stop the collapse of Moscow's medicine."
Citizens are frustrated by the government's handling of the crisis and the impact of the war on their daily lives. These protests are not only about economic issues but also demand political reforms and an end to the war in Ukraine. Beyond the alarming economic indicators, a deeper and more complex crisis looms: the psychological toll of war and instability. Many Russians are grappling with feelings of helplessness, fear, and uncertainty about the future. A 2024 poll by the Levada Center found that 77% of Russians fear being called up for military service. Meanwhile, it is estimated that over 100,000 Russian soldiers have been killed or injured in the war in Ukraine, shattering countless families. This widespread unease has hit a boiling point, making many people think about leaving not as a choice but as a way to get away from a situation that is getting worse. The mental stress has led to a rise in depression cases. The number of diagnoses has grown by 25%, and 1 in 4 Russians face depression. A 2024 study by the Moscow Institute of Psychiatry also found that drug and alcohol abuse has increased by 15% among Russians ages 18 to among Russians 18 to 45. A shocking 71% of Russians say they feel overwhelmed or lost, and 45% say their stress makes it hard for them to sleep. The psychic effects of this crisis go beyond individual pain, as they are tearing apart Russian society as a whole. Only 22% of Russians trust the government, down from 45% in 2022. This is a huge drop in trust in institutions. Also, 55% of Russians say they don't feel linked to their communities, which makes feelings of loneliness and isolation even worse. As the mental toll rises, more and more Russians are leaving the country in search of safety from this mental health crisis. As of 2024, Vladimir Putin continues to maintain a firm grip on power in Russia, leading many to label his regime as a form of dictatorship, despite the appearance of democracy. While Russia holds regular elections, there are widespread allegations of election rigging, manipulation, and suppression of political opposition that cast doubt on the legitimacy of these processes. Putin has been in power, either as president or prime minister, for more than 2 decades, far exceeding the typical terms seen in democratic systems. The 2020 constitutional changes allowed him to reset his presidential term limits, enabling him to potentially remain in power until 2036. This move was widely criticized as a method to cement his authoritarian rule. The media in Russia is tightly controlled, with independent outlets either shut down or severely restricted. This control over information allows Putin's government to craft a narrative that favors his leadership while silencing dissent. Internationally, Putin's regime has been accused of fostering a climate of fear and repression, with little regard for human rights. Response of the Russian leadership to dissent and opposition has further exacerbated the crisis it is currently experiencing. Freedom of speech has been restricted, stricter surveillance has been implemented, and political persecution has increased as a result of an increasingly harsh system. This environment of fear and repression has contributed to a rising sense of disillusionment and has become a big push factor for those who are looking for a society that is more democratic and open to the outside world. In 2024, the suppression of civil liberties and rights in Russia has intensified under President Vladimir Putin's regime. Freedom of speech, assembly, and the press have been severely restricted as the government cracks down on dissent. Any criticism of the government, especially of Putin, is met with swift action. Protesters, journalists, and political opponents are frequently arrested, harassed, or even forced into exile. For example, Alexei Navalny, a prominent opposition leader, has faced multiple arrests. After surviving a poisoning attempt in 2020, Navalny returned to Russia, only to be imprisoned on politically motivated charges. His case highlights the harsh measures the government takes against anyone challenging Putin's authority. The Russian government has also introduced stringent laws to control public demonstrations. Unauthorized protests are met with heavy police presence, and participants face imprisonment or heavy fines. For example, in 2024, hundreds of demonstrators were detained in Moscow while protesting against the government's corruption and human rights abuses. Putin's grip on power remains strong as he continues to suppress political opposition and civil liberties. His government justifies these actions by claiming they protect national security, but in reality, they are aimed at maintaining his control over the country. This growing authoritarianism leaves little room for democratic freedoms, and Russia's future as an open society looks increasingly bleak. Brain drain. One of the most alarming consequences of Russia's current migration crisis is the massive brain drain. Highly skilled professionals, including scientists, engineers, and experts, are fleeing the country in droves. Their exodus represents a devastating blow to Russia's innovation and economic potential, severely weakening the country's competitiveness in global markets and stifling its innovation ecosystem. In 2023 alone, over 100,000 skilled professionals, particularly from the tech and scientific sectors, left Russia for the US, Germany, and other Western countries that offer economic opportunities and political freedom. This mass emigration has been fueled by Russia's political repression, economic instability, and the increasingly authoritarian government under Vladimir Putin. As Russia faces a significant talent vacuum, it may struggle to cultivate individuals capable of driving breakthroughs in fields like artificial intelligence, cybersecurity, and biotechnology. Without a robust pool of skilled professionals, Russia risks falling behind as other nations advance in these critical areas. This intellectual capital drain poses a direct threat to the country's economic future. Historical examples, such as Venezuela, illustrate the devastating effects of mass emigration on a nation's potential. Once rich in resources and human capital, Venezuela has struggled to recover from the exodus of skilled professionals, which has crippled its economy. Similarly, Russia could face a dark, uncertain future if it cannot reverse this trend and retain its intellectual capital. Issues relating to demographics. The demographic issues Russia is facing are not new, but the present crisis has worsened these challenges. The nation's population is shrinking due to a combination of declining birth rates and the emigration of younger, productive citizens. In 2023, Russia's birth rate was 9.8 births per 1,000 people, one of the lowest in decades. This trend, combined with rising death rates exacerbated by the COVID-19 pandemic and ongoing conflict, has led to a population decline of over 1 million people in recent years. The fertility rate, at 1.5 children per woman, remains far below the 2.1 replacement rate necessary to sustain the population. Moreover, nearly 20% of the population is now over 65, straining the country's pension system and healthcare services. Economists warn that without significant reforms, Russia's shrinking workforce and aging population pose a serious threat to its long-term economic growth and social stability. The government's efforts to boost the birth rate, such as financial incentives for families, have yielded limited results. Political repression and economic instability under Putin's regime continue to contribute to the ongoing demographic crisis, threatening the future of the country. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell for more insights on global issues. Together, let's stay informed about the stories that shape our world. Until next time, take care.